Who let this trash in?" That was the very first thing my mother said to me after 72 months of absolute silence. She did not whisper it. She said it loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. She was the matriarch of the Sterling family, standing in her custom designer gown, sneering at me across a floor filled with 200 of the most ruthless attorneys in the state, right beside her. The bride narrowed her eyes. My older sister, Caroline, hissed through her perfectly painted smile, "Call security now." They were entirely sure of themselves. They always were. But then the groom, a brilliant corporate lawyer named Julian, realized what was happening. He dropped his champagne glass. The crystal shattered loudly against the marble floor, stopping the string quartet mid-song. "Are you crazy?" Julian yelled, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. He stepped between me and my mother. "This woman is—" I raised my hand. Just an inch. It was enough to make him stop. I looked directly into my mother's furious, panicked eyes, smoothed the lapel of my charcoal silk suit, and calmly replied, "You really should have checked your facts." What happened in the next 5 minutes did not just ruin a multi-million-dollar wedding. It completely dismantled a 3-generation legal dynasty. It exposed a web of lies so deep that it cost my mother her firm, her reputation, and her most guarded secret. But the collapse of the Sterling Empire did not actually begin in that ballroom. To understand how they fell, we have to rewind. We have to go back to a quiet Tuesday morning, exactly 4 weeks before the wedding. I am standing in the center of my own kitchen. The house is completely silent. In my hand, I am holding a piece of heavy, cream-colored cardstock. It arrived in the morning mail. It is a wedding invitation. It is thick and heavy, the kind of expensive paper that feels less like a request and more like a legal summons. My thumb slowly traces the raised gold foil lettering pressed deep into the surface. The sweeping calligraphy reads, "The Sterling family requests the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter, Caroline Sterling, to Julian Astor." Caroline, my sister. I stare at her name for a long time. I read it 3 times over, waiting for the letters to make sense. For 72 months, my family had acted as if I never existed. They did not just cut me off, they erased me. I was a stain they scrubbed out of their pristine public image. Yet here was an envelope with my new married name on it, sitting on my granite counter like an unexploded device. I press my finger against the sharp, foil edge of the card. It is freezing cold. That icy sensation seeps into my skin. It pulls my mind away from the quiet safety of my home. It pulls me all the way back through 6 years of silence. Back to a mahogany dining table. Back to the exact night I learned that in my family, love was just another contract. My childhood home was a fortress of ambition. In the main hallway, right before you reached that massive mahogany dining table, there was a space we simply called the wall. It was not a place for family portraits, hand-drawn refrigerator art, or vacation memories. The wall was a cold, intimidating shrine to billable hours and legal prestige. It held 3 generations of law degrees, board certifications, and partnership announcements. Every single document was framed in heavy dark wood and non-reflective glass. My mother, Beatrice, was a managing partner at one of the most ruthless firms in the city. My father, Arthur, was a senior partner at another. In our house, you did not get unconditional love. You got performance reviews. Sunday dinners were basically cross-examinations. If you did not have a measurable, profitable achievement to report, you were completely invisible. My sister, Caroline, was their golden investment. She was 3 years older, loud, aggressively confident, and practically engineered in a lab to inherit the Sterling Empire. I was the exact opposite. I hated the cutthroat arguing. I liked research. I liked finding the quiet, tedious loopholes that actually helped regular people, which is why I deliberately chose a different path. The night of my college graduation, my mother hosted a catered dinner for 20 extended family members. It was supposed to be my celebration. I wore a simple black dress, sitting quietly near the end of the table, waiting for the traditional toast. But Beatrice did not stand up to talk about my degree. She tapped her crystal wine glass with a heavy silver fork, stood at the head of the table, and beamed directly at my sister. "Family," my mother announced, her voice echoing perfectly off the high dining room ceilings. "I have the most extraordinary news. Caroline has just been accepted into the top law program in the country." The room erupted. Aunts and uncles clapped loudly. My father immediately ordered the waiters to pour the most expensive champagne. For 20 solid minutes, they aggressively dissected Caroline's bright future, her prestigious clerkship prospects, and her inevitable glorious rise to senior partner. I sat there in absolute silence, watching my own graduation dinner effortlessly turn into a pep rally for my sister. Eventually, an older uncle cleared his throat and awkwardly looked my way. "Well, what about Eleanor? She graduated today, too. What is next for our new grad?" The table went completely quiet. My mother looked down at me. She did not smile. She looked at me the exact same way she looked at a junior associate who had just lost a massive corporate lawsuit. "Eleanor is taking a basic desk job," my mother said, letting the words drag out like a heavy disappointment. "We poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into her education, and she has decided to settle for being a paralegal loser." A paralegal loser. She said it right to my face, in front of 20 people who shared my blood. A few cousins awkwardly looked down at their expensive china plates. Caroline let out a short, mean little laugh. Most girls at 22 would have cried. They would have pushed their heavy wooden chair back, run crying up the stairs, and slammed their bedroom door. But sitting there under the crushing weight of my mother's disgust, something inside my chest went entirely cold. I did not shed a single tear. I did not try to argue my case. I calmly picked up my silver fork, cut a piece of steak, and put it in my mouth. I chewed slowly. I looked at the people sitting around that mahogany table. I saw my father looking away, proving he was too much of a coward to ever defend his own daughter. I saw my sister basking in a glory she had not even earned yet. I saw my mother treating her own children like disposable assets on a corporate balance sheet. I was not a broken victim anymore. I was a silent observer. And I realized right then that I would never, ever let them audit my worth again. That quiet realization at the dinner table kept me entirely sane for the next 6 months. I did my paralegal work by day and kept my head down at night. I survived the coldness of that sprawling house because of one person. My grandmother, Margaret. She was a retired court clerk who spent 40 years watching the justice system from the front row. She had a sharp wit and a deeply gentle heart. She was the absolute only person in the Sterling family who did not treat love like a billable hour. When I was with her, I did not need a fancy title or a 6-figure salary. I was just Eleanor. She listened to my dreams about helping vulnerable people, and she loved me exactly as I was. Then, on a freezing evening in late November, Margaret suffered a massive stroke. I dropped everything at work and rushed straight to the city hospital. My chest was tight, and my hands were shaking against the steering wheel. All I wanted was to sit by her bed and hold her hand. I needed to tell her I was there. But when I reached the intensive care floor, I did not find my grandmother waiting for me. Instead, I found my mother, Beatrice. She was standing outside the heavy wooden double doors like a sentry at a heavily guarded checkpoint. She was wearing a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, looking completely unfazed by the tragedy. Two large hospital security guards stood right behind her. I stepped forward, my voice trembling as I asked to go inside. Beatrice did not blink. She simply held up a thick manila folder. She did not look sad or grieving or even tired. She looked victorious. With a calm, measured voice, she informed me that she had recently executed a comprehensive medical power of attorney. It was a dense, complicated legal document giving her absolute and unquestionable control over Margaret's visitors and medical decisions. Beatrice looked at the security guards, then looked right back at me. She stated that my name was explicitly removed from the approved visitation list. I begged her. I swallowed every ounce of my pride and pleaded for just 5 minutes to say goodbye to the only woman who truly loved me. Beatrice simply adjusted her expensive watch. She told the guards that I had no legal standing in this family and instructed them to remove me. They escorted me into the elevator like a trespasser. Margaret passed away alone. 2 days later, I found out through a brief, sterile text message. The cruelty did not end in that hospital hallway. The very next morning, Beatrice cornered me in the main foyer of our house. She handed me a printed financial statement showing that my checking account, which was tied to the family trust, had been completely frozen. She told me I had exactly 1 hour to pack my belongings and vacate the premises. I did not scream. I did not break down in front of her. I calmly walked up the stairs to my childhood room, packed my life into 2 heavy duffel bags, and walked back down. When I reached the bottom step, Beatrice pointed toward the kitchen. She ordered me to use the side door leading out through the garage. She hissed that the wealthy neighbors did not need to see her failure of a daughter dragging cheap luggage down the main driveway. I stopped. I looked at the dark hallway leading to the garage, and then I slowly turned around. I walked right past my mother. I grabbed the heavy brass handle of our massive oak front door and pulled it wide open. The bright morning sunlight immediately flooded the dark, suffocating entryway. I stepped out onto the porch, looking Beatrice in the eye one last time. I did not say it out loud, but I made a silent, unbreakable vow right there on the stone welcome mat. The next time I step through this door, I will not be the paralegal loser. I will be the one holding the gavel. I walked down that long, paved driveway with 2 heavy bags and exactly $1,450 in a separate savings account they did not know about. I did not look back. Not even once. The biting November wind cut right through my coat, but my mind was completely clear. The first few months were just about basic survival. I rented a tiny apartment above a 24-hour dry cleaner on the far edge of the city. The smell of harsh chemicals seeped through the floorboards, but it was mine. I took a job at a small, desperately underfunded legal aid clinic. I worked the night shift. Most people do not realize that the legal world does not sleep when the sun goes down. It just gets quieter, darker, and a whole lot more desperate. My clients were not corporate executives arguing over millions of dollars in offshore accounts. They were elderly widows who had been tricked into signing away their entire pensions by fast-talking salesmen. They were retired mechanics fighting predatory loans that multiplied in the dark. They were grandmothers, just like Margaret, who were confused and terrified by the dense legal jargon shoved in front of their aging eyes. The clinic paid me barely $15 an hour. My family would have laughed out loud at that number. Beatrice billed her corporate clients $800 an hour just to read a simple email. But sitting at that scratched metal desk at 2 a.m, holding a weeping woman's hand while I carefully highlighted the hidden clauses in her eviction notice, I felt something I never once felt in my mother's immaculate dining room. I felt useful. I felt real. I had an actual purpose. I spent 2 full years working deep in the trenches of the legal system. I answered the ringing phones. I filed the endless stacks of paperwork. I combed through thousands of pages of predatory contracts, looking for the one single sentence that could save a family from total financial ruin. And slowly, a very clear picture began to form in my mind. The elite, untouchable lawyers in their glass, high-rises liked to think they ran the entire world. They strutted into courtrooms in custom-tailored suits and claimed all the glory, but they were entirely hollow. The whole system was actually held up by people exactly like me, the paralegals, the clerks, the exhausted assistants who stayed up until dawn doing the actual, tedious, back-breaking work. If the invisible people stopped working for just 1 week, the mighty law firms would completely collapse under their own weight. I realized that the people who needed help the most were completely priced out of the traditional justice system. They did not need a shark in a tailored suit who cared more about a golf handicap than a human life. They needed someone who would just listen to them. They needed a translator. They needed mediation. And that is exactly what I decided to build. I took every penny I had saved in a coffee can. I took out a small business loan. I rented a 2-room office in a neighborhood my mother would not even dare to drive through. I called it Vance Legal Solutions. I did not use the Sterling name. I wanted absolutely nothing to do with that toxic legacy. My business model was incredibly simple. We provided aggressive, affordable mediation and legal support for the regular people the big firms actively ignored. We handled the messy, complicated human problems that did not generate massive billable hours, and we were devastatingly effective at it. Within 12 months, we were not just surviving, we were rapidly expanding. It was during one of those grueling early mediations that I met Marcus Vance. He was a civil rights attorney. He was incredibly sharp, relentless in a courtroom setting, but he had the kindest, most patient eyes I had ever seen. The first time we went up against each other in a cramped mediation room, I completely dismantled his core argument using a forgotten legal precedent I had found at 3 a.m. A normal lawyer would have been furious. Marcus just leaned back in his squeaky chair, smiled warmly, and asked me to dinner. Marcus was everything the Sterling men were not. He did not hide behind cowardly silence. He did not care about social status, designer labels, or country club memberships. He cared about doing what was right. He saw the fierce fire in me, and he never once tried to put it out. He joined my firm shortly after. We became partners in business, and 2 years later, we became partners in life. We got married in a quiet, beautiful garden ceremony. We had exactly 50 guests. Not a single one of them shared my blood. I took his last name with immense pride, Eleanor Vance. It sounded like a woman who built her own table instead of begging for a tiny seat at someone else's. Over the next few years, Vance Legal Solutions absolutely exploded. We hired 50 employees, then 100. We opened bright new offices across 3 different states. We started intercepting massive clients from the traditional bloated law firms. We were doing the unthinkable. We were making empathy profitable. And we were quietly taking a massive bite out of the monopolies my parents worshipped. But no matter how large the company grew, there was one thing I kept completely private. Even as our revenue climbed into the millions, a piece of my heart was still stuck in that cold hospital hallway where I was cruelly turned away. I needed to do something with that heavy grief. I needed to turn it into a weapon. So, quietly, without any flashy press releases or expensive charity galas, Marcus and I established a massive financial endowment at the state's most prestigious law school. We fully funded a program that covered full tuition, housing, and living expenses for brilliant students who came from absolute poverty. Students who had the grit and the deep empathy that the Sterling family completely lacked. The University Development Office begged me to put my name on the new building. They wanted to host a massive formal dinner in my honor. I firmly refused. I insisted on complete and total anonymity. The scholarship was simply named the Margaret Grant, in honor of a retired court clerk who taught me that nobody has to earn the right to be loved. Every single year, The Margaret Grant pulled one exceptional student out of poverty and turned them into a devastatingly skilled attorney. I watched their amazing careers from a quiet distance. I never met them. I never asked for a single thank you note. I just wanted to seed the legal world with good people who actually cared. I had absolutely no idea that one of those brilliant, underprivileged students would eventually grow up, graduate at the very top of his class, and fall in love with my sister. "Eleanor, we are here." Marcus spoke softly, his deep voice cutting through the quiet hum of the luxury car engine. The sudden sound pulled me right out of that freezing memory of the hospital hallway. The ghosts of 6 years ago faded back into the dark corners of my mind. I blinked slowly and looked out the passenger window. We were parked outside the grand entrance of the city's most exclusive, historically restricted country club. Valets in crisp gray vests were rushing back and forth, quickly opening the heavy doors of expensive town cars. I looked down at my own hands resting in my lap. They were perfectly steady. My fingernails were not digging into my palms. I was not the terrified 22-year-old girl dragging cheap duffel bags down a concrete driveway in the cold. I was a 31-year-old woman who owned her own life. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stepped out into the warm evening air. I was not wearing some forgettable wallflower navy dress to blend into the background. I was wearing a sharply tailored charcoal silk suit. It was structured, unapologetically expensive, and completely unforgiving. It was not the outfit of a desperate, estranged sister begging for a tiny crumb of family acceptance. It was the heavy armor of a woman who had come to collect a very old debt. Marcus walked around this car and offered me his arm. He looked handsome in his dark, classic tuxedo, but more importantly, he looked entirely unbothered by the sheer wealth surrounding us. He knew every single piece of my painful history. He knew exactly whose wedding we were attending tonight. When Julian had handed Marcus the thick gold foil invitation at the office, completely unaware of the dark family connection, Marcus had left the decision entirely up to me. I chose to respond yes. We walked through the massive double doors and stepped into the main ballroom. The Sterling family always knew exactly how to stage a magnificent performance. The room was dripping in excessive, loud wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked perfectly manicured golf greens. Massive crystal chandeliers hung heavily from the painted ceiling, catching the light and throwing sharp rainbows across the polished marble floor. A string quartet played a classical waltz softly in the corner. The room was already packed with the city's legal elite. Judges, managing partners, and corporate heavyweights milled around holding crystal champagne flutes. We glided right past the towering ice sculptures and the massive floral arrangements to find our assigned seats. Table 2. In the ruthless, calculated hierarchy of high society weddings, the seating chart is a literal map of human value. Table 1 is strictly for the wedding party and the immediate family. Table 2 is reserved for the absolute most honored guests, the vital mentors, the people with actual, heavy influence and unshakable power. Julian had placed his brilliant mentor, Marcus, right at the front of the room. By extension, that meant the paralegal loser was sitting exactly where her mother believed she never belonged. We sat down. Waiters instantly materialized to fill our water glasses. A prominent federal judge and a well-known civil rights attorney stopped by to shake Marcus by the hand. I nodded politely, sipping my sparkling water, letting the opulent noise of the room wash over me. I did not anxiously search the crowd for my family. I knew they would find me. It took exactly 12 minutes. I was looking toward the massive arched doorway when Caroline made her grand entrance before the official ceremony began. She was drowning in layers of imported white lace, clutching a heavy bouquet of white roses so tightly her knuckles were turning yellow. She was supposed to be a glowing, joyful bride. Instead, she looked heavily medicated and completely on edge. She was scanning the room, counting her prominent guests, doing the rapid mental math of her own social importance. Then, her eyes swept over the front tables. Her gaze hit Marcus. Then, it slid right over to me. Caroline stopped dead in her tracks. The fake, laminated smile actually fell completely off her face. I saw her mouth open slightly. I saw the immediate visceral panic flood her eyes. She did not see a terrified younger sister hoping for a reunion. She saw a ghost sitting at the VIP table. Carolyn sharply elbowed the woman standing next to her. "Beatrice!" My mother turned around. She was wearing a custom, pearl gray designer gown. She looked like a reigning queen surveying her loyal subjects. Until she followed Caroline's trembling finger. Beatrice locked eyes with me across 30 feet of white linen and imported flowers. For 72 months, I had wondered what this exact moment would feel like. I thought my heart would race. I thought my throat would close up. I thought I might feel that familiar, pathetic urge to shrink down in my chair and apologize for existing in her space. I felt absolutely nothing. My pulse did not speed up. My hands did not shake. I sat there in my charcoal silk suit, entirely still. I just watched them. I watched the great untouchable Beatrice Sterling completely lose control of her own body for 5 long seconds. Her chest heaved rapidly. Her breath caught hard in her throat. She gripped the back of an empty wooden chair just to steady herself. She was hyperventilating. It was fascinating to witness. A woman defending a simple mistake gets annoyed. A woman defending a massive structural lie gets terrified. They had spent 6 years telling everyone in their elite circle that Caroline was an only child. They had buried me alive to keep their public record totally clean. And now, the dead daughter was sitting at table 2, drinking their expensive water. Beatrice's mind was racing. I could physically see the frantic calculations happening behind her widened eyes. She could not cause a screaming scene in front of federal judges. She could not call security without explaining exactly who I was and why I was being thrown out. She was completely trapped by her own obsession with appearances. Beatrice sharply smoothed the front of her pearl gray gown. She forced her tight facial muscles into a stiff, terrifying mask of polite warmth. She whispered something harsh into Caroline's ear, pushed the bride toward the holding room, and began marching straight toward my table. The queen was coming to neutralize a threat, but she was entirely wrong. I was not a threat anymore. I was the gavel. Beatrice marched toward my table like a commanding general, but she never made it. Before she could cross the polished dance floor, a heavy hand gripped my elbow from behind. I turned around. It was my father, Arthur Sterling. He did not say hello. He gave a sharp, frantic nod toward the dark, arched hallway leading to the coat check. I excused myself from Marcus and followed him. The hallway was quiet, heavily draped in dark velvet curtains, separated from the ballroom's glittering lights. Arthur stopped abruptly and turned to face me. He looked older. His gray hair was thinner, but he still wore the same heavy, expensive cologne and the exact same cowardly expression. He reached into the inner pocket of his custom-tailored tuxedo. His hands were shaking as he shoved a white envelope against my chest. "There is a blank check inside," Arthur whispered. "Write whatever number you need, 50,000, 100,000. Just take it and leave through the kitchen exit right now. Do not ruin your sister's night. Do not embarrass your mother." I stared at the envelope. For 6 long years, I had told myself a comforting lie about my father. I thought Beatrice controlled everything, and Arthur secretly loved me but was too afraid to show it. Looking at him right now, sweating in his expensive suit, the brutal truth finally hit me. He was never a hostage. He was a senior shareholder. His long silence was not powerlessness. It was a calculated vote. He had fully agreed with every single cruel thing Beatrice ever did to me. He let her cut me off. He let her lock me out of my grandmother's hospital room. He watched me walk out with two cheap bags and never called once. He let her be the executioner so his hands stayed clean. It was the ultimate betrayal. A mother's hatred is loud, but a father's indifferent silence is the thing that actually breaks you. "You want me to use the back door," I said slowly, letting the words hang in the heavy air. "It is easier this way, Eleanor," he pleaded. "Please, be reasonable." I looked at the white envelope. I did not open it. I did not tear it up in a dramatic fit of screaming rage. I slowly opened my fingers. The envelope slipped from my hand and fluttered down onto the patterned carpet. "I do not use back doors anymore, Arthur," I said quietly. "And you do not have enough money in your entire trust fund to buy my absence." I turned my back on him. I walked away, leaving him standing alone in the shadows, staring down at his useless check. I walked straight back into the bright, crowded ballroom. I took my seat next to Marcus at table 2. He placed his hand gently over mine. He grounded me. Seconds later, Beatrice finally arrived at our table. Her face was a masterclass in aggressive, fake hospitality. She was gripping her evening bag so hard her knuckles were white. But before she could even open her mouth to deliver whatever poisonous script she had prepared, another woman stepped up to the table. It was Victoria Astor, the mother of the groom. Victoria was a truly formidable woman. She was a senior board member of the State Bar Association, and she came from old, quiet money, the kind of generational wealth that does not ever need to shout or show off. She wore a simple, elegant sapphire dress. She did not wear flashy diamonds or carry a heavily branded designer bag to prove her worth to the room. She possessed a terrifying, calm intelligence that made even Beatrice Sterling nervous. Beatrice always cared about climbing the social ladder. Victoria Astor owned the ladder. "Beatrice," Victoria said smoothly, her sharp eyes flicking from my mother directly to me. "I do not believe I have met these guests. Who are they?" My mother froze completely. The color drained out of her heavily powdered face. She let out a tight, shrill little laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Oh, Victoria," Beatrice stammered. She stepped awkwardly between me and the groom's mother, trying to physically block her view. "This is Eleanor. She is a distant relative, from out of town. It is a very complicated situation. Not someone you need to worry yourself with tonight." A distant relative. The erasure was so incredibly effortless. Victoria Astor did not blink. She tilted her head slightly. She looked at Beatrice, then she looked at me, and then her sharp gaze settled on Marcus. A distant relative," Victoria repeated. Her tone was perfectly polite, but it carried the chilling, heavy weight of a brutal cross-examination. How absolutely fascinating, because I was under the strict impression that Caroline was an only child. You have mentioned that fact quite a few times, Beatrice, yet this young woman sitting here has your exact eyes. Beatrice opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was suffocating under the crushing weight of her own lies. "And," Victoria continued smoothly, turning her attention directly to my husband, "I know exactly who this man is. This is Marcus Vance, one of the finest civil rights attorneys in this entire state. My husband has been trying to recruit him to our board for 3 years. Victoria extended her hand gracefully toward me. "Which means you must be his wife, Eleanor Vance, the founder of Vance Legal Solutions." I smiled warmly and shook her hand. "It is a genuine pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Astor." "Please call me Victoria," she said. She did not let go of my hand immediately. She looked at me with deep, genuine curiosity. "Your firm is doing incredible work, Eleanor. You have completely disrupted the legal market in this city. I have to ask, how exactly does a distant, out-of-town relative of the Sterling family end up running the most successful new mediation firm in the state? I glanced up at my mother. Beatrice looked like she was going to physically collapse. She was staring at me with pure, unadulterated terror. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. She knew that with one single sentence, I could blow her entire pristine world to pieces. I could tell Victoria Astor exactly who I was. I could expose the fake only child narrative. I could humiliate the Sterling family in front of the absolute most powerful woman in the room. The silence stretched between us, thick and incredibly heavy. Beatrice's perfectly painted lips were trembling. She was entirely at my mercy. I let her sweat in that suffocating silence for 10 full seconds. I let her feel the absolute terror of losing her entire fabricated empire. And as I opened my mouth to answer Victoria, a loud ringing sound echoed through the massive ballroom. Someone was tapping a spoon against a crystal glass. It was time for the wedding toasts. The sharp ringing of a silver spoon against a crystal glass cut right through the heavy tension at our table. The wedding toasts were beginning. Beatrice visibly swallowed hard. She pulled her shoulders back, forced a stiff smile, and practically fled toward the front of the room to take the microphone. The ballroom slowly quieted down. 200 of the most powerful people in the city took their seats and turned their attention to the stage. Beatrice stood under the bright spotlight. She looked out over the crowd, holding a glass of champagne, playing the role she loved more than anything else in the entire world. The flawless matriarch. Friends, esteemed colleagues, and family. Beatrice began. Her voice was incredibly smooth and practiced. Tonight, we are not just celebrating a marriage, we are celebrating the continuation of a legacy. She spent the next 5 minutes delivering a speech that felt much more like a corporate shareholder report than a mother's blessing. She talked about the heavy weight of the Sterling name. She talked about excellence, about tradition, and about the unmatched prestige of their law firm. Then, she turned her attention to Caroline. She called Caroline her brilliant only child. She talked about how Caroline had flawlessly carried the family torch, passing her bar exams with flying colors, and preparing to become a senior partner. It was all a meticulously crafted performance. I sat quietly at table 2, watching Caroline stare down at her plate. Caroline was gripping her white linen napkin so tightly her hands were shaking. She knew she had failed the bar exam 3 separate times. She knew she was running a fake wellness consulting business funded entirely by Beatrice's quiet bribes. But in this room, for this exact moment, she was the golden child. The crowd clapped politely as Beatrice raised her glass and returned to her seat at the head table. Then, the groom stood up. Julian Astor stepped up to the microphone. He looked incredibly handsome and deeply sincere. He was a genuinely good man. And good men are the absolute most dangerous things you can invite to a stage built entirely on lies. Julian smiled at Caroline, then looked out at the massive crowd. I did not grow up like most of the people in this room, Julian said quietly. The ballroom fell completely silent. I did not come from a long line of judges or senior partners. I grew up in a neighborhood where the law was something to be feared, not something you practiced. When I was 22 years old, I had exactly $45 in my checking account. I had the grades for law school, but I did not have the pedigree. I almost walked away from my entire dream. Julian took a deep breath. But I am standing here today as a corporate attorney because of 2 very specific people, and tonight, for the very first time, they are both sitting in the exact same room. Julian gestured directly toward our table. The first person I need to thank is my mentor. He took a chance on a kid who did not know how to tie a proper tie. He taught me that the law is not about billing hours. It is about protecting people who cannot protect themselves. Please raise your glasses to Marcus Vance." A warm round of applause swept through the room. People turned in their chairs to look at Marcus. He smiled and raised his water glass in acknowledgement. But the applause died down quickly because Julian was not finished. He gripped the edges of the wooden podium. "The second person," Julian continued, his voice thick with emotion, "is someone I have actually never spoken to. 10 years ago, my tuition, my housing, and my entire legal education were paid for by an anonymous endowment. It was called the Margaret Grant. At the head table, I saw Beatrice completely freeze. The champagne glass in her hand tilted, spilling a few drops onto the white tablecloth. She knew the name, Margaret. She knew exactly who that was. For a decade, I tried to find out who funded that scholarship," Julian said. "The university refused to tell me. The donor insisted on absolute, complete privacy. They did not want a plaque. They did not want a dinner in their honor. But lawyers are incredibly stubborn. And last month, I finally called in a favor and traced the original filing documents." Julian looked directly at table 2. He looked right at me. "The founder of the Margaret Grant is sitting right next to my mentor," Julian said clearly into the microphone. "She built an incredible company from the ground up at 23 years old. She named the grant after her late grandmother, a grandmother who taught her that justice should actually be accessible to everyone." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. "Eleanor Vance," Julian said, his voice ringing through the massive room. "Would you please stand up?" I did not hesitate. I calmly pushed my chair back and stood up in my charcoal silk suit. 200 incredibly wealthy, powerful guests turned completely around in their chairs to look at me. The applause started slowly, then built into a roaring wave of genuine respect. Federal judges were clapping for me. Senior partners were nodding in approval. I stood there, bathed in their applause. But my eyes were locked directly on the head table. Beatrice looked like she had just been struck by lightning. Her mouth was slightly open. Her chest was completely still. Caroline looked absolutely terrified, shrinking back into her expensive white lace dress as if trying to disappear. But Julian was still holding the microphone. He waited for the applause to quiet down. He had absolutely no idea about the toxic family history. He just thought he was sharing a beautiful coincidence. "The most amazing part of this whole story," Julian said with a bright, loving smile, "is that life works in mysterious ways. Because Eleanor is not just a brilliant founder and my incredible benefactor. She is also Caroline's younger sister. I am marrying into a family with 2 brilliant legal minds." The microphone caught a sharp, high-pitched gasp from the front row. It was Victoria Astor. Every single person in that ballroom stopped breathing. The applause died instantly. The wealthy guests, the judges, the board members, all of them had spent the entire cocktail hour listening to Beatrice and Caroline talk about the bride being an only child. They had just listened to Beatrice give a formal toast specifically calling Caroline her only child. And now, the groom himself had just introduced the most impressive woman in the room as Caroline's sister. The load-bearing lie had just snapped completely in half. The Sterling family's entire carefully curated world was crashing down right in front of their eyes. The silence that followed Julian's words was thick enough to choke on. 200 pairs of eyes shifted rapidly between the glowing groom, the terrified bride, and Beatrice Sterling. The matriarch of the family stood frozen at the head table. The pristine, untouchable image she had spent her entire life building was bleeding out right onto the expensive parquet floor. I did not sit back down. I remained standing in my charcoal suit, completely calm. Beatrice's survival instinct finally kicked in. It was a fascinating, grotesque thing to watch. The absolute terror in her eyes was instantly replaced by a frantic, sickening warmth. She practically sprinted away from the head table, her pearl gray gown swishing loudly in the quiet room. She walked straight up to me, extending both of her trembling hands, acting as though we were the closest family in the world. "Eleanor, darling!" Beatrice gasped loudly, projecting her voice so the federal judges at the next table could hear. She reached out and grabbed my forearm. Her fingers dug in, desperate and sharp. "What a wonderful surprise. Why did you not tell us you were Julian's benefactor? Come with me, sweetheart. Let us step into the service hallway and sort out this silly misunderstanding." She leaned in close. Her voice dropped to a frantic whisper, meant only for me. "Do not ruin this. Come to the back room, I will fix it. I will hang your portrait on the wall tomorrow. Just play along." She was actually bargaining. She was offering me a cheap, empty frame on a wall I stopped caring about 6 years ago. Before I could even pull my arm away, a calm, deeply authoritative voice cut through the air. "I do not think Eleanor needs to go to a service hallway. Beatrice." Victoria Astor stepped right up to the edge of our table. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. The entire room was hanging on her every single word. Victoria looked at my mother's hand gripping my arm, and her expression curled into quiet disgust. "And I certainly do not think she needs a portrait on your wall," Victoria continued smoothly. "A woman who just wired $3 million in cold, hard cash to our university endowment this morning does not need to hide in a back corridor." $3 million. Victoria said the number clearly, letting it land like a heavy brick on my mother's chest. Beatrice's mouth opened, but she could not breathe. Her hand went completely limp and fell off my arm. Victoria was not just defending me. She was publicly confirming my immense power to the entire room, stripping away the very last shred of Beatrice's social superiority. The great Beatrice Sterling was officially nothing but a desperate, lying woman trying to leech off of the daughter she had thrown away. I looked at my mother. I looked at the frantic, trembling woman in the pearl gray dress. 6 years ago. I would have given anything for her approval. Now, I just felt a quiet, profound pity. "No," I said softly. Beatrice blinked. "What?" "No." I repeated louder this time. I stepped back, putting physical space between us. "You do not get to claim me. You do not get to use my success to patch the massive holes in your sinking ship. I am not a Sterling, I am a Vance." I turned away from her completely. I looked at Marcus. He offered me his arm, his eyes full of deep, unwavering pride. I took it. We did not sneak out through the kitchen. We did not use the velvet-draped side exits. I kept my head high, my spine straight, and walked with my husband right down the exact center of the ballroom. I walked straight toward the massive oak front doors. Waiters stepped aside. Senior partners watched in stunned silence. As we pushed those heavy doors open and stepped out into the cool, fresh night air, I heard the undeniable sound of an empire collapsing behind me. The heavy oak doors closed behind us, cutting off the noise of the ballroom. The night air was incredibly crisp. Marcus squeezed my hand as we walked down the grand stone steps toward the driveway. I did not look back. I reached into my small silk purse and pulled out my phone. For 6 years, I had kept a single audio file saved on my home screen. It was a digitized recording of a very old cassette tape. I pressed play. The soft, slightly scratchy voice of my grandmother Margaret filled the quiet night. "Eleanor, my sweet girl." Her voice crackled through the speaker. "Never let them convince you that your worth is printed on a piece of paper. A law degree makes you a lawyer. But your heart, your fierce, beautiful heart, makes you a force of nature. Build your own house. Eleanor, do not rent a room in theirs." I listened to her voice as a single tear slid down my cheek. I was finally free. The fallout from that night was brutal and absolute. The Sterling dynasty did not survive the wedding reception. Julian called off the engagement before the wedding cake was even cut. Victoria Astor made a single phone call to the State Bar Association the very next morning. By Tuesday, the terrible truth was printed on the front page of the Legal Tribune. Caroline had not just failed the bar exam 3 separate times. She had been illegally providing legal counsel through her fake wellness clinic, entirely funded by my parents to keep up appearances. The massive scandal gutted their firm. Arthur and Beatrice lost their senior partners, their prestigious country club membership, and the one thing they valued above all else, their flawless reputation. They lost their beautiful estate. They were left with absolutely nothing but the hollow shell of a fabricated life. Their empire was officially gone. I never spoke to them again. I did not need to. I have Marcus. I have my thriving firm. And I have a life built entirely on truth. To the wonderful women listening to this story right now, I know exactly how much it hurts when the people who are supposed to protect you look at you and decide you are not enough. I know the unique, crushing pain of being the family scapegoat. But you really need to hear this message today. You are worthy of genuine respect. Love that is conditional on achievement is not love. It is an exploitative contract. You do not owe your precious loyalty to people who only want you when you are useful to their public image. If you have ever been kicked away from a table, use that as the reason to build a completely new one. Take your brilliance, take your dignity, and walk right through the front door. Your life belongs to you. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and share this beautiful story with a woman who needs to hear it today.